So let me just give you a brief outline of what happened to me. On June 1st, 1985, I was a college professor. I'm sorry, Ken, but I was a real arrogant SOB. I mean, like so many college professors are, and the reason, he'll forgive me. He'll forgive me. Yeah, he'll forgive me. Because the reason why they're so arrogant is because when you have expertise on a topic, more than anybody else in the whole world, and if you're a full professor, you know more than anybody else in the whole world about something about that big. You know, you've got it, and very few people could challenge your authority on it. And then you get the wonderful opportunity to stand in front of a classroom of bright young people and tell them what the truth is. It's a very heady ego experience, almost as ego-enhancing as being a preacher. Okay? And it's dangerous. And many faculty, and myself included, I got to the point where I thought I knew an awful lot about life and what I was doing. The other thing that happened is, in my family history, I was raised in a Protestant New England background, raised in the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts. And when I became a teenager, I rebelled against my family and all that, and ended up going to college and learning about existentialism, which is, of course, atheistic, and becoming sort of a socialist communist. This was at Denison University, and the teacher was Mr. Dickens, by the way. I mean, I remember being intrigued by him, and he would take me off in the evening, and we would go to bars when I was 17 years old and drink draft beer and smoke Camel cigarettes and talk about how stupid everyone was because they believed in God, and they believed in heaven and hell, and they believed in democracy and all that sort of thing. It was a real seduction. I was really, if you remember the Star Wars movie, The Dark Side of the Force, I really was turned over, but I did it all willingly. Mr. Dickens didn't do a single thing to me that I wasn't begging for him to do, which was to give me a sense of arrogance and a sense of contempt for everything that I had been raised to believe. And as I went through college, I discovered the true philosophy of the United States of America. And I submit to you that this is the philosophical stance of America, which is take care of yourself, get everything you can get, and live for pleasure, and don't go to jail in the process. And so I was intelligent enough to push things to the limit without ever breaking the civil laws that would put me in prison. And many people in our society, I would say the majority of people in our society, live that kind of philosophy of life. It's my firm conviction that this is not a God-fearing society, nor is it a Christian society by any stretch of the imagination. This society is basically hedonistic with a philosophy of just pure materialism. And that's who I was, and it was reinforced by my culture. Every day, in every way. The radio, the TV, the faculty that I hung out with, the students that I was able to influence, the books that I was reading. It all reinforced the stance. So on June 1st, 1985, I had a catastrophic medical situation, which was my stomach, actually the small stomach, burst, and the hydrochloric acid and enzymes and bacteria that make up the digestive juices were leaking into my abdominal cavity, digesting myself. And it was excruciatingly painful, the worst pain I'd ever experienced in my life. And I was taken to a hospital where there was unfortunately no surgeon who felt available to do anything for me, so I was left in a room for 10 hours. And the doctors in the United States told me that the situation is like having a burst appendix. If you get to it quick, it's no big deal. But if you leave it, what happens is you start developing really bad peritonitis, which is, if you leave it long enough, it's going to be fatal. And I didn't get that. anyhow, the pain went from bad to worse, and a nurse came in at around 8:30 that night and told me that they were unable to find a doctor to do anything for me, and that they would try and get a doctor the next day. I had been given no medication, any treatment, and I had not been seen by a doctor from the time that I left the emergency room and was taken to this other hospital, this surgical hospital, whose name is Cochin, the Hospital General d'Assistance Publique de Paris. Don't go there. If you ever get sick in Paris and they take you there, get on the Concorde. Just don't go to that hospital. I highly recommend you avoid that place. Anyhow, when she told us that there was no doctor available, I said, my wife, this is the end. I'd told her for several hours that I was dying, and she believed me, I believed me, my roommate believed me. And we said our goodbyes, and I went unconscious. Probably in a very short while, I awoke in consciousness and found this object in the bed which bore a remarkable resemblance to my body, which I couldn't believe was me, and this is kind of like that scene in Ghosts. I didn't believe I was dead. It never occurred to me that I was dead. I just thought that something very bizarre was going on. And I tried to communicate with my wife and my roommate, Monsieur Florent, and they were completely unresponsive to me. That made me very agitated, and I heard people outside the room calling me, "Howard, come with us. Come now. We've been waiting for you a long time. It's time to go." And I thought they were hospital personnel who were going to take me to have the surgery that I needed and that I'd been begging for, and my wife had been begging for all day long. They led me down the corridor, which became darker and darker, and there was no time, so whenever I refer to time, I'm misspeaking myself because there was no time. But this period of the walk with these people from the corridor into darkness took quite a while, like walking from here to Provo or something. It was a real long walk and real slow, and they became cooler, and when we finally got into the darkness, I told them I wasn't going to go with them any further. And they started to push and pull at me, and I began to fight back. I was completely whole. I felt completely real. The problem that I had in my stomach was gone. I didn't have any problems with my stomach, but when they began to bite and claw and tear and push and pull, it hurt exactly like it would in this world. Matter of fact, my sense is that it hurt a little more. Actually, the pain was a little more exquisite. And the more that they hurt me, the more it encouraged them to try and inflict more pain in me. And they took, I've never thought of the appropriate word, they got some kind of gratification out of inflicting this pain on me. It seemed to me at the time that they were almost devoid of any more physical sensation, and so they were trying to derive sensation from my pain. The greater pain was to the cruelty and the humiliation and the consequent defilement of me. That was much worse than just being ripped and bitten. And I found myself lying on the floor of that place, and I heard my voice, but it did not come from my throat. In fact, the weirdest thing is it felt like the voice came out of my chest, right here. And it said, "Pray to God." And I thought, I don't believe in God, dumb idea. And a second time, my voice, recognizing my voice, emanating from what seemed like my chest, said, "Pray to God." And I thought, I don't know how to pray, even if I wanted to pray. I've forgotten how to pray. And in fact, looking back, it was probably 22 or 23 years since I had said a prayer. And a third time, but slightly more emphatic, the voice said, "Pray to God," and I was wondering what were those things that I had learned, those phrases, those magical incantations when I was young that I said, not really meaning to pray, but trying to remember them. Accidentally, a few of those phrases came out of my mouth. Something like this. "Our Father who art in heaven, for amber waves of grain and purple mountains' majesty, I pledge allegiance. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, forgive us our sins. And I realize this is coming out all wrong. This isn't, I don't know how to do it. But the interesting thing that was happening to these people, and these are not demons, by the way, and I've tried to emphasize this by saying these people in this darkness, reacted with extreme hostility to the words that I was saying. And they spoke in language that was far more vulgar and obscene than anything I've ever been exposed to in this world. But the message was very simple. There is no God. Nobody can hear you. And if you don't stop praying, we're going to really hurt you. Like what they had done to me. And I didn't tell you, by the way, I didn't tell you what they really did to me. And you don't need to know. Nobody needs to know. And it was like, wow, I can get them back. I can make them angry by mentioning God. So I'm just trying to think of phrases, something that refers to God in it. Believing at the time that prayer had to be a memorized thing. I didn't know you could just pray from your heart. You could just address God. I thought you had to have something memorized. So I'm trying to remember these things. And as I spoke that, they retreated away from me, unable to bear any mention of God. And they retreated into the darkness and left me alone. This is the part of the experience that's completely impossible to talk about, because I was left alone in that darkness for an incalculable amount of time. And in that time, I thought about what had happened to me, what I had done with my life, what it all meant. And in briefest possible terms, this is what I concluded after having months, years, an eternity to think about my life, that my life was a complete waste. I had not been a good son. I had not been a good husband. I had not been a good father. I was a mediocre teacher in a mediocre school in a mediocre universe. Ken's relating. And that my life, I had no joy in my life. I had lived selfishly and manipulatively for my own gain, and what had I accomplished? I had a few fair weather friends, but basically my life seemed to be pretty pathetic. And it occurred to me that I had died in that Paris hospital, and that dimensionally, when I had died, I was no longer visible to my wife or Monsieur Florent anymore, and that these people who inhabited this other dimension that I had gone into when I died came and collected me, and they were the garbage men and women of the universe, and they were taking me down the garbage chute, into the garbage heap, into the sewer of the universe, into the cesspool where I could live with like-minded people for all eternity. And that it was right and just and proper, and I didn't have anything in the world to complain about, because I belonged to them. They were my soulmates, and they belonged to me. And that didn't make me real happy, but I knew that that was the truth, the undeniable truth, that they too had lived selfishly and arrogantly and manipulatively all their lives, never caring more about another person than they cared about themselves, and certainly never giving any thought to there being a God, a supreme being, a higher entity, a higher power, a greater reality. They denied that because their idolatry was self-worship, and that we were akin, we were soulmates. And the reason why I had to say that all that way is because it really is painful to admit that about yourself. I am not proud of that at all. But I'm telling you that because that's just the way it was. And as I thought about my fate, being with these people forever and ever and ever, and it has nothing to do with time. It just means that there would never be any reality for me other than their reality, which was utter darkness, hopelessness, despair, pain, anguish, and just sort of gnawing and tearing at each other. That was their reality, and that would be my reality. I sank deeper and deeper into a state of despair, and in that, a unbelievably beautiful, welcomed, vivid memory came into my mind of myself as a child, sitting probably in a Sunday school classroom, a little child singing "Jesus Loves Me." And all as I could remember was, "Jesus loves me, la la la, Jesus loves me." Just over and over in my mind. But the important thing about that memory is that I could feel in a very vivid way that there was a time when I was a little person when I believed in something other than me. I believed in something good and whole and wonderful and amazing. And I didn't know anything about Jesus sitting there, but I knew that I had believed in something as a kid, and if I ever needed to believe in something good and true and out there and powerful that cared about me, this was the time. And so like a person drowning on the third time, they say they come up and down 3 times, so this is like, I felt like this was my last chance, and I called out into the darkness with all the strength I could muster, "Jesus, please save me," not having a clue whether there really was a Jesus or whether he was capable of saving me, but hoping with everything that I had that it would be true. And to my complete astonishment, first a tiny light appeared in the darkness, and then this overwhelmingly brilliant light. As Dr. Ritchie said last night, if you took, 10,000 welding lights, it still wouldn't describe the brightness of the light. In this world, that light would just consume everybody in this room. You'd just all be vaporized by the light, but it's not that kind of light. It's the light of love, and instead of vaporizing you, it gives you life, and it gives you love. And that light came upon me, and out of that light came arms which reached down and touched me and gently picked me up, and as I was being picked up, I was being healed and made whole and all. And as I looked at myself, there was such horror because I was just all wounds and gore, and all of that stuff disappeared. And I was picked up and embraced by this man who was within this light. You don't have to ask me later because I can never describe him any better because his brilliance was all I ever saw. But I addressed him as Jesus. He responded as Jesus, and as far as everything I know and everything that I believe is holy, and as God is my witness, it was Jesus Christ. And that's the end of that story. And he's my best friend. He is my Savior. He's the one that loves me. He knows me. And when he was there, it was like he knew everything that had ever happened in my life, all those things that I am so ashamed of that I have never told any. I've never told my wife, my mother, my sisters. I'd never tell anyone. He knows it. Doesn't necessarily like it, but he loves me anyways. All the times I blasphemed him, and I'm talking hundreds of times a day blasphemed him. Really doesn't like that, but he still loves me. And he knows everything about me, and he accepts me just the way I am. It's unbelievable, just unbelievable. So I did the only reasonable thing you can do in a situation like that. I just bawled all over him like a baby, and I snotted on him, and I cried on him, and I throbbed on him, and he rubbed my back, and he was just sort of going there. It was just sort of trying to, like a mother with her child, just trying to give me comfort and love. And he took me out of that place. And as we were moving towards heaven, I want to be real clear, I never got to heaven. We were going towards heaven. And I felt the power of God and the holiness of God and the love of God emanating out of heaven. And I thought to myself, and I have to clean this up, I thought I'm a piece of filthy crud, but I was a little more vulgar than that. I am a piece of filthy rag. I don't belong here. He's made a terrible mistake with me. And with that, we ceased our movement towards heaven. And he spoke to me for the first time, speaking directly into my mind. And he said, "We don't make mistakes." Push your number, we'll call you right back. They call their banker in Iowa City, Iowa, who's just gotten back from a disastrous trip to Paris, France, and had to have money wired over in an emergency, and says, tell Beverly, the banker tells Sherwood and Esther Tuttle, tell Beverly the money will be at such and such a bank in 10 minutes. Okay? Beverly comes, they call her back, tell her, she comes into the room, she says, I've got to leave for a few minutes, I'll be back in a little while, I've got to go get the money. She comes back 2 hours later, she had done an absolutely ridiculous, futile thing. She'd gone by the American Embassy for some help, which of course was completely futile and a waste of time. And she went to the bank, got the money, went to TWA, bought 2 tickets, just like, with cash, bought 2 tickets for the United States for 8 o'clock Monday morning. She comes back to the room, she holds up the 2 tickets. This is exactly what happened. And she says, I've got the 2 tickets, we're going home Monday. And I said, are you crazy? I said, I'm sick. I'm supposed to be here for a month. How am I going to go home Monday? And she said, you just told me a little while ago that we were going home Monday. And I said, oh, that was somebody else. You don't believe anything I ever say. Why did you believe that? You're out of your mind. And she said, do you want me to take the tickets back and get the money? And I said, hang on to the tickets. Don't sell the tickets. Something's happening here. So she says, I don't know what to do. She said, if I bought the tickets now, you want me to get rid of the tickets now, you don't want me to get rid of the tickets. And I said, just hang on to them. So Saturday morning, when the nurse took in the Cochin Hospital, the nurse hands you a thermometer, you take your own temperature rectally. And I took my temperature. I had that, by that time, using our Fodor's Guide to Paris, had been using the conversion table and been watching my temperature. And I was doing around 104.5 to 104.8 at the time. I was soaked all the time in sweat. They were giving me no medication. And I was doing really badly. So lying in that room on Saturday morning, I said, thanks a lot. We can't afford to pay my mother and father-in-law back, Sherwood and Esther back, $2,000. And you tricked me. You told me to believe, and I'm never going to get home. So I just want you to know that I don't appreciate it. And I got my little lip sticking out, and I'm sitting there in this room, all alone. The voice goes, believe. Oh, great. The believe thing again. I hate this believe thing. So my wife had dutifully, when she came to visit on Saturday, brought my clothes, my soap, shaving stuff. I've never been bathed or shaved while I've been in this hospital. And I stink. I mean, I reek. It's just like, I'm so ripe, She brought my clothes, my shaving kit, soap, towels. We didn't have towels, of course. Didn't have blankets. And she brings all this stuff. Sunday morning, I wake up. I feel like $1,000,000. I get out of bed. Saturday afternoon, they had taken the last of the staples out of me. I bathed myself and washed my hair using the sink in the bathroom. And I don't know, this takes a lot of effort, a lot of work. The day before, I couldn't sit up. Now I'm like, hey, singing in the shower, right? I bathed my feet, I bathed my hair, I brushed my teeth, I shaved. I go, I get all cleaned up, my wife shows up, I'm sitting there all pretty and ready to go. We go walking out to the nurse's desk, and the nurses, Mr. Stone, all this stuff, and I'm like, no, you're wrong. I'm not wrong. You're wrong. I'm being released today, and it's your mistake. Get the doctor. So she runs and gets the doctor. This doctor comes and he says, what's going on here? And I said, I'm being released today. Where are my papers? And he says, I'll release you. And he goes, he just wants to get me out of there. So he gets the papers, and he releases me. We go stay at my wife's hotel. The next morning I fly back to the United States. Our flight between Kennedy and Cincinnati was delayed 4 hours. And I'm sitting in Kennedy Airport, and I've been up for like hours and hours and hours. And I knew that I wasn't going to make it. I could feel this really bad sense coming over me. And I said to my wife, I got to go to the bathroom. I was in a wheelchair, so she took me to the door of the bathroom. I went into the bathroom, and I ran cold water over my hands and over my face because I wanted to get the sweat off me so it'd be clean before God, because I didn't want God to see me dirty. And I said, God, I want to go home. Let me go home. I don't want to die in this airport, and I don't want to die in New York City. I just want to go home. And so I came into that bathroom, and I said, I'm going to make it. And when we got to Cincinnati, I walked off the plane, went to St. Luke's Hospital, and my family doctor, who had been up on the whole situation, the most wonderful, saintly guy in the world, Jack Grover, God rest his soul, he met me at the hospital, and he diagnosed me, and he said, I don't know how you ever made it here. And I said to Jack, I said, I've got some powerful friends. And he looked at me funny, and I thought, he's going to send me to the psych ward if I tell him who my friends are. I mean, I didn't know what Jack's faith was, and I didn't want to find out, at my expense, so I just let that go. And I was in that hospital for quite a while, and everyone that would come to see me, every doctor, nurse, specialist, I was having all these doctors come to see me because I was put on critical, and I stayed critical for 5 weeks. I would tell them about Jesus and about the angels, and and I knew I'd only have had some people a little shot at them, so I'd say do you realize, that you're a holy man because you're doing God's holy work, and God has given you the gift of healing in your hands, and that there's angels around you smiling upon you. And at this time I was real opened up, and I could see angels and demons, and I could see people's feelings. I was in a real strange place, and I was also sick and crazy out of my head. And I found out later that I was the joke of St. Luke's Hospital. And people used to come to see me because, let's go see what the crazy guy's going to say next. And I'm in the hospital, and angels are starting to come and visit me because the problem was I didn't want to get well. I wanted to die. My family didn't believe me. My mother didn't believe me. My sainted mother didn't believe me. She thought I was crazy. My kids didn't believe me, and they were really tired of hearing about Jesus all the time. Real tired. And my few friends who came to visit me, they weren't interested in all this Jesus stuff. And I just thought, well, I'm out of here. No, I have no use or value or place or purpose in this world whatsoever. I'm going home, and the way to go home is to die. And I know I can't kill myself, so all I have to do is just die. So I'm willing myself, not real consciously, but pretty consciously, to die. So, the Frenchman who spoke this morning talked about getting down to 60 pounds. Well, yeah, but consider where he started from. I got down to 165 pounds, but that was a big weight loss for him. I mean, it was, almost 100 pounds in a few weeks. I mean, I was going bad, quick. And the angels would come and speak to me, and tell me that I needed to get better, and I'd tell them, I just want to go home, I want to be with them. And when I'm saying the angels came, I'm talking about I would be conscious and awake, and there would be like an angel in the room, filling up the whole room. And the thing they always hated, they never hang around for anybody to come in and see him. And like a nurse would come in and say, you're not going to believe it, there was an angel in here just a few minutes ago, and we'd been talking for half an hour. And they'd go, that's nice, Mr. Stone. So, this is how God works. And this is one of the things I learned. I really want you to get this message. They have a new night nurse on. She's 22 years old. Her name is Lisa. She's blonde, and she is cute. Cute, cute, cute. And I just love Lisa. My mother, Freudian slip, my wife, hated. My wife hated coming to the hospital because all she would hear about was this third shift nurse called Lisa and how kind Lisa was. And Lisa understands me, and Lisa gave me a sponge bath. And Lisa's so pretty. And my wife would great, she was knocking herself out, spending all this time on me, and I want to talk about how great Lisa was. So one night Lisa comes on, and I can't hold down water chips. Ice chips. If they put ice chips in my mouth, I have dry heaves for 2 hours. I'm taking nothing. I'm just being fed intravenously, and I'm getting real bad. my eyesight's pretty much gone. I can really just sort of make out like grays and shapes and things like that, and my mental functions are pretty much gone. I have no strength. I don't get out of bed. I'm just lying in bed. I'm just fading away. I'm supposedly on a liquid diet, which you know what that is. It's like, you know, broth and Jell-O and tea, and I'm not having any of it. I'm not taking water, nothing by mouth. And I haven't taken anything for weeks. And Lisa comes in one night, and she says to me, "You know what you need? You need a milkshake with raw eggs and protein supplement." And I go, I said, "Just the thought of that makes me sick." And she said, "What's your favorite flavor?" And I said, "Well, it used to be chocolate." And she said, "I'm going to go down to the Cancer Treatment Center where they've got really good gourmet ice cream, and I'm going to make you a milkshake with like milk and ice cream and raw eggs and protein. I'm going to bring it back and you're going to drink it." Now, this isn't on the chart or anything. Do you realize what Lisa's doing? I mean, Lisa could be fired, right? For this. This is crazy. This is nuts. And I knew it. And I said, "Lisa, if you do that, you're going to get fired, and I'm going to throw up and be sick all over you, and it's a disaster." And then she used the magic word that nobody had thought of to use before. She said, "Yeah, but I'm going to make the milkshake out of love, and you're going to drink it." I didn't know what to say, because she used the love word on me. So she comes back a little while later with a milkshake like that big, you know, this giant milkshake with protein supplement, eggs, and ice cream. And I sit there, and she sits with me while I sip the whole thing down. It must have taken me an hour or 2 hours to drink it. And because she's looking at me with those big old love eyes, talking about love, you know, what can I do? I've got to drink it, and I've got to enjoy it, right? The next day, I started eating. And I got well. God did something. The angels aren't just supernatural creatures. The angels are people like Lisa and like you and I, who God gives some kind of strange directive to, like when I spoke to my wife and get those plane tickets, and she did it totally out of character. I asked her later, "Why did you do that?" And she said, "I was under some kind of like supernatural compulsion. I don't know why." I said, "That's so unlike you." And she said, "It's completely unlike me. I don't know why I did it, but I had to do it." I don't know why Lisa would go against all medical policy and jeopardize her job and jeopardize my health by making a milkshake, but she was under a compulsion, and she did it, and it turned me around. Somebody had to break this cycle of self-pity and suicidal morbidity that I was in. And she just used the love word, which nobody had bothered to use on me. As time went by, eventually I got home. I'm trying to build up my strength and things like that, and I want to go to church so badly because it was given to me in my understanding that that's where the truth about God and the light of God and the Spirit of Christ was being spoken about and propagated and actually experienced. And so I wanted to experience this. And I didn't know where to go to church. I had not been in a church in my entire adult life since I was 15 years old. And so I prayed and prayed for 2 weeks. The answer that I kept getting was, go back. Go back. I think it makes no sense. Go back to being an atheist? You know, that doesn't make, I mean, what kind of, is there an atheist church I could go to somewhere? You know, like, it's crazy. And then I was talking to a woman, and I was explaining, you know, it's like, I didn't know where to go to church, and I kept getting this thing about going back. And she said, "Go back to where you're planted. Go back to where you were planted." And she says, "What were you?" And I said, "Well, I was a Congregationalist." And she said, "Well, I go to a Congregational church." And I said, "Well, what's the name of it?" And she told me, Christ Church. And so when my wife came home, I said, "Do you know a Christ Church?" And she said, "Yeah, it's like, you know, 3/4 of a mile from here. And it's where your daughter sang in the high school glee club where they gave all their performances that you never went to." And she said, "Well, I had to go." And I said, "We're going there Sunday." So on Sunday, I wasn't quite ambulatory yet. So she gets me cleaned up and dressed, and we get in the car, and darn it, we have to park across the street in the bank parking lot. this is as close as we can get to the church. So we get across the bank parking lot, across the street, up the front steps of the church, into the narthex, more stairs. Man, this is, I mean, I'm putting all my copious 160, 70 pounds on her, and she's dragging me up to church, and I look like death warmed over. And the service had already started, and they're singing, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," and the ushers open up the doors to the narthex into the sanctuary. And I look, and there's like church here, and all the angels, and the place is filled with golden light, hundreds and hundreds of beautiful angels listening to and just taking in the praise of God that the people are lifting up. And so I did what any sensible person would do in a situation like that. I dove into the carpeting. I just dove for it, like taking a dive off a high board into the water. Well, the ushers were a little panicked because they thought I'd had a stroke or something. And my wife is leaning over me going, "Get up, get up, get up, get up." And I'm saying, "Thank you, Jesus, thank you, Jesus, thank you, Jesus, I love you, Jesus." You know, and the ushers are like, you know, should we get the lifeguard, the psych unit? Because this is like a mainline church. If I'd been in a Pentecostal church, I would have been made pastor, you know. But so they get me into a pew, and I'm just crying my heart out because, like, I know that the closest I am ever going to get to heaven in this world is in a worshiping congregation. And I'm not suggesting that Christ Church in Fort Thomas is any better than any other church or any other group of people who are worshiping God. I'm just saying, wherever two or three are gathered in my name, so is God, Christ, the angels there, participating, being present, and enjoying that experience. And I've experienced that many times in many places ever since. And I'm crying my little heart out, and my wife would say to me in her little stage whisper, "We will never go to church again." She's saying, "You blew it this time." And I'm just crying, and I couldn't get up for the hymns, I couldn't get up for the prayers, and people are looking at me like, that poor, beautiful man. Well, the next Sunday we were back, because I spent all week saying, I'll be good, I promise I won't cry, and I won't praise Jesus and all that stuff if you take me back. So she takes me back, and of course I lied. I did all the same stuff I over again. And they sort of kept us in the back right section for the undesirable people in the pews. And in time, the pastor came to visit me. And he was excited about getting a college professor into his congregation, even though this was a real, nutcase. And he began to assimilate me into that church. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because I want to tell you about one other experience with a religious person that happened shortly before this. The only religious person I could think of in my entire life, in my entire circle, that I knew was a nun that I'd had as a student in 1972-73 as an art student. And her name now is Sister Dolores. They stopped using saints' names. She used to be Sister Patrick. Yeah, she hated it. So now Sister Dolores had sent me at Christmas time, birthday, Easter, weird cryptic cards saying like weird, bizarre things like, "I'm praying for you, God loves you," And I'm like, get these cards, and it's like, ew, Sister Dolores sent me another one of her, like somehow I would be tainted, with her. So anyways, but she and I had kept in contact and some phone calls, and I had done some art lectures for her American history classes at the school that she taught at. And so I thought, well, I'll call up Sister Dolores and tell her what happened to me. And she was the first person who ever heard my whole story other than my wife and my family. I mean, she just sat there and listened to the whole thing. And when it was done, she's sitting there with that little nun. She wore a full habit, her little nun habit, and her little nun posture, she never moved. You know, she never fidgeted, none of that. And she's just looking at me with those little nun eyes. And I said, "Sister, do you believe me?" And she said, "Of course I believe you." She said, "I've just got one problem." And I said, "What is it?" And she said, "I don't know why it took so long." I said, "What do you mean it took so long?" And she said, "I've been praying for you since 1972, every day, that God would get your attention, you know, and that God would give you faith. And I don't know why it took all of these years, you know." So watch out for sisters. Watch out for any man or a woman of faith that gets a case for you and starts praying, because their prayers will move heaven and earth. In this church of a couple hundred people that I started going to, I found a group of people no better than me, no worse than me. I mean, some seem to be better, nicer people, and some people seem to be not as nice as I was. But the one thing that everybody had in common, they were just people trying to learn about God and how to learn how to be a better person. And I thought that was so extraordinary. And the other thing that was extraordinary, you belong here. And I'm like, wow, not only is he cool and he flies, but he talks, you know, I mean, this is great, you know. And he loves me. And so we began to converse, and the conversation was real simple. I would think, everything I would think, he would understand. And one of the things I thought was, I said, "Do you understand everything I think?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "What if I have a thought that I don't want you to hear?" And he said, "I'll hear it." And I said, "Well, what if I thought of," and then I thought of a thing that I didn't want him to hear, and he heard it, and he started laughing because he thought it was so, the magic word was breast. I thought breast, and he heard that, and he thought that was so funny that I would think of that as something that I didn't want him to know that I would ever think about. And he took delight in me because I was so intimidated by him, and he was trying to tell me, it's like, look, he was saying to me, there is nothing you have ever done, there's nothing you ever thought that I don't know. So you don't have to hold anything back. You don't have to hide anything, because I know you better than you know yourself. And then he called some of his friends forward, and we had a life review. These friends were angels, and there were about 7 of them. And we did a life review. And my life review was, it was chronological, it was very slow. And we didn't do every moment of my life. We simply we would do a scene. It would be sort of a 3-dimensional image of a certain scene from my life. And we would experience it from different points of view. And the thing that was amazing about the life review was that I never experienced my life from the perspective of having lived it through my eyes. The life review was from the perspective of other points of view. And sometimes we would actually hear and feel the feelings of my mother or my sister or my wife, etc. Sometimes we would even see the consequences down the road, or the things that built up to it. Like, for example, I always thought my father was an insensitive, cruel man. And I would see how he had worked 12 hours a day as a salesman. Just, you know what he did for a living? Just rejection after rejection after rejection. You know, the death of a salesman, Willie Loman, that was my dad. He lived in a world where he would make, 12 or 20 calls in a day and be lucky if he got 1 or 2 sales a week. He'd come home spent, burnt out, angry. And because he was in that kind of a mood, I would reject him. And I would turn away from him and reject his need for my love. And then he would respond with, scolding me or putting me down. And so that would confirm my feelings about him. And I saw how I had participated in the family dynamics. And I had always thought that I was the victim, of a bad father. And I found out that my father was the victim of a bad son. It was a shocker. It was a real shocker. In my whole life, there wasn't really situations where I could blame people. As we went through my life, I'd say, "Hey, wait a minute, go back there. I got put on the football team. I was a sophomore, and I was reserve football team, but I started in the Westfield game, You didn't show that. And they said, well, that wasn't really important. What we want you to see is some incident with your sister, some incident with your mother, with a friend, some act of compassion or lack of compassion. As my life review went on, it became clear that the only thing they were interested in was whether I treated other people with compassion or not. And as my life went on, what I saw was I became increasingly more sophisticated in being manipulative and self-centered. And it hurt terribly to see that. And it hurt even worse because here was my new best friend that I was ever going to have in the whole universe, and all he wanted was for me to do a few friendly acts of kindness, and instead I turned my back towards people. And it was killing him. I could feel his pain. He was so disappointed, and the angels were so disappointed, and they also let me know that they were in fact conduits of God's feelings, and God was disappointed because God had created me to perform a few simple tasks in my life, and I had rejected them. To love my family, to be a good person, a God-fearing person, and I had rejected all that. That's all God wanted me to do, was to learn about love, and had given me a few people to interact with in the whole universe, to receive love and to give love. And I had rejected the assignment and the learning opportunity for the sake of fame and fortune in this world, which is a total joke. It was unbearable. And I begged them to stop showing me my life. And many times I said, I can't take any more of this. I can't take any more of it. And they said, you have to see it. You have to see it. When we were done, I was so relieved. And they said, do you have any questions? And I said, I've got millions of questions. And they said, ask whatever you like. So I asked them every question that at that time I could think of. And every single question I asked, they answered simply, kindly, straightforwardly, even to the extent of producing the situations. Like I asked about the Holocaust, and we were at Auschwitz, experiencing Auschwitz. And it was, I can never talk about that because it's just so awful. I asked them, when I started to get the point, I better be careful what I ask because they're going to show me, if I ask them, I asked them about the future if, the world keeps going the way it's going, and they showed me that, and that was awful. And I said, what could it be like if we changed our ways? And they showed me a beautiful future, etc. I asked them personal questions. I asked them biblical questions. I asked Jesus lots of questions about himself and what he had done and what he hadn't done. And all of the answers were straightforward, but all of the answers that particularly Jesus gave me were all fascinating answers that still haunt me to this day, much more in this world, that the Bible is just a little tiny glimpse of what I did when I was in this world. Just a little, just enough to sort of whet your curiosity. But he said it doesn't begin to cover what I really did in the world. I'm like, wow. And I think about that all the time. So when people come to me and say, Pastor, are these stories about Jesus doing this and that in the Bible, are they true? And I said, they tell you enough. It's what you need to know. They're that much truth. But there's more to it than that, a whole lot more. It's just a little bitty baby introduction to Jesus and his work in the universe. When we were done with the questions and answers, I said, I want to go to heaven. And they said, no, you've got to go back. You have to go do the things that God created you to do in the first place. And I can't go through this whole big argument because of the time, but first of all, I had been created to love my parents and to love my two sisters and to eventually learn about love by being given a wonderful woman who to this day is my wife, Beverly, and to learn how to love her and protect her and to receive her love and to grow in love and learn about love from each other, and that we would be blessed, and we're in fact blessed with children, to learn more how to give and receive love and to nurture love and to love the work that God had inspired me to do and my colleagues and my students, etc. And I said to them, I'll tell you what, I'll go to heaven. You take care of my family. And I knew that my family would be in much better hands with Jesus and the angels taking care of him than I could ever do. And they said, well, actually, we have had to take care of him because you haven't done a very good job. And it's time that you started taking care of him. I'm like, and so we talked about a lot of things, all of the excuses as to why I should be allowed to go to heaven, and them refuting them. The final one I just want to add was, I said, I can't go back because if you send me back there, I will die of a broken heart. And I said, nobody has ever known me the way you know me. Nobody has ever loved me the way you love me, referring to Jesus and the angels, but particularly Jesus. And I said, nobody. I've never known anybody like you, anybody as good as you are, anybody that has known me as well as you do, and you still like me. I said, if you send me back, I'm going to die back there. And they said, don't you know we've always been with you? We always will be with you. And I said, is it going to be like before? I never hear you, never see you, never feel you, never touch you. And I said, yeah, it's going to be like that again. And I said, if you send me back, I'll die. I can't go back. And they said, if you pray once in a while, you'll know we're around. You probably won't ever see us or hear us or feel us or anything. You'll just know that our love is with you. If you pray, and they talked a lot about prayer and contrition and forgiveness and coming real out front with God, being real honest with God, and then getting quiet and just centering on the goodness of God and on the love of God. And I'm not going to go into a whole big thing about prayer, but that's talked about how to pray and to get into that state where you could possibly be receptive to the Spirit of God to be around you. And I said, if you promise, and so I made Jesus and every angel promise. And they all had to promise in turn that they would help me make it here. And so with that, I was back. And when I was back, immediately, first of all, when I came back into the body, the pain, I went from ecstasy, unbelievable ecstasy, back into this body of pain. And so I was like a fish out of water, gasping. And I couldn't get my breath, and the pain was just overwhelming. It was just screaming, knockout, incredible pain. And the nurse who had just been in the room and said they couldn't get a doctor came back, and she says, the doctor has arrived at the hospital, and we're going to do the surgery right away. They bodily removed my wife from the room, and they prepped me for the operation. And as I was being wheeled by my wife on the gurney out of the room to go to another floor where the operating room was, I said to my wife, I lifted my head up and I said, everything's going to be wonderful now. And she burst out in tears because, of course, she thought, this was like the condemned man saying, but I really meant it. And after the surgery, I woke up and I was lying on a stainless steel table with drains in it, and I was stark naked, and I looked down at my chest, and it was covered with a brownish, sort of cinnamon-colored paint. I don't know what it was. What? Oh, betadine. I thought it was paint. Well, anyways, there was covered with the stuff, and there was like a little railroad track going, which I still have, the scar of the little railroad track thing with the staples, 56 staples. And they were washing me in the warm, sudsy water. They would scrub, and then they would take this really cold rinse water and rinse the warm water off, and it was like, ooh, ah, ooh, ah, ooh. I was like, and so I'm looking at the nurse, and there's tubes and stuff, and I don't, because I had a tube down my nose and stuff like that, and it was really, I didn't feel like I could talk, and I was just sort of moaning and stuff, and the nurse looked at me, and she was very concerned, and she said in French that, you're not supposed to be awake, and she called for the doctor. The doctor said he can't be awake, and she went over to him, and she said, his eyes are open, and he's moving, he's awake. So the doctor came over, and as he was coming over, I remembered I really didn't like this man because he should have helped me hours and hours and hours before, instead of waiting 10 hours to do this. And so I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to deal with him. So I closed my eyes. So he chews out the nurse and told her in French, don't bother me again with this silliness. He can't be awake. He's under the anesthetic stuff. I was getting the gist of this. And so the nurse bends over and looks in my eyes like that, and I open up my eyes and I go, "Hi!" And she leaps back. And so I said to her, with this tube down my throat, which really was feeling very sore, and I wasn't really used to it, I said, "Is this heaven or is this hell?" Because I wasn't sure. Where was it? And she said in French, I don't understand what you're talking about. And I said, "I know, it's earth." And I closed my eyes in great sadness. The next time I was awake, I was in this, what we laughingly call the recovery area of this hospital. And my wife entered, and this was the next day, this is Sunday, and she came in and she said, "Howard," and I said, "It's all love. It's just love. And you need to, it's just like if you took a dive into the ocean, but the ocean is just love, and you just let yourself go and just take all the love in." And she said, "I'll come back later when you're feeling better." Because I didn't know how long I was going to be around and how long I'd be able to communicate, and I wanted to get my experience across to her now, instantly. And it was quite evident that she thought I was rambling, hallucinating, just out of my mind. And it was very frustrating. So after that day, every day, I would tell her pieces of the experience. And because I would get so emotionally distraught, I was so close to it that the emotions were extremely raw and powerful. She would get upset, and she'd say, "Don't talk about it. You just get so upset." And I said, "I have to tell you about it." And over a period of a week, I told her the entire experience. And I knew it was going to take quite a while for that to register as the truth. Meanwhile, I want to tell you about really about the transformative part of the experience, which is interesting. I keep wondering all the time after this happened, did it really, 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 really happen? Or somehow have I fabricated this in my mind? I know in my heart that the most important, most significant, the clearest insight into what is true and real has happened to me, and I also know that nobody's going to believe it. I wonder, did it really, really happen, or somehow have I manufactured, fabricated, confabulated, whatever you want to call it? Is it a function of my brain? Did I really go these places and see these things and experience these? How will I ever know? On Tuesday, I was brought up to the room. Monsieur Florent was taken for tests around 11 o'clock out of the room, and I was left alone. I was wide awake. This was shortly after 11. The sun was streaming in the window, no curtains. And I'm lying there, and I hear a voice, clear as a bell, and it said, "You can't get well in this hospital. You have to go back to America. Go home Monday." So I lift my head up, I look around the room, there's nobody there. So I said, "Great, now I'm hearing voices." And the voice said, "Believe." And when it said believe, it was just like, ooh, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Well, it was like that too. It was it was like a heart thrust, it's like believe. I knew. So I go, oh great, now I've got to believe. So my wife showed up at 2 o'clock. My wife is a wonderful person, and she is a very successful attorney. If any of you watch Law and Order, you know the new woman character they have on Law and Order? That's my wife. My wife's very, very verbally assertive and aggressive. She's got the most incredible mind I've ever known. I worship this woman. but I would never want to go up against her. She said, my wife said to me, if you ever leave me, you will have nothing. You won't even have your shoes. And I'm like, you know, and I'm like, and I believe her. I mean, and so she comes in the room 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which was the beginning of the visiting period at Cochin Hospital. And I'm going to give you verbatim exactly what transpired. I said to her, go get plane tickets because I have to go home Monday. Now, I'm scheduled to be in this hospital for a month. I've just had like major abdominal surgery. And I'm doing really badly, by the way. I find out a few days later that I got double pneumonia, collapsed lung, extreme peritonitis, and possibly, I was diagnosed as having non-A, non-B hepatitis, but I don't think I have hepatitis C because I'm still alive, so I don't know. Anyhow, I had no liver function. Dr. Ritchie, my SGOTs and SGATs were like 2 and 3 and 4,000. My bilirubin was like, went up to like 380. I mean, I was having no liver function, you know, I was like in bad shape. And I told my wife, get plane tickets, we got to go home Monday. She says, okay, dear. She walks out into the hall, goes to the payphone that's in the hall with a couple francs, places a collect call to Iowa City, Iowa, to her mom and dad, and said, nobody ever asked for my curriculum vitae. No one ever wanted to see my publication record, you know, to see whether I could be, you know, get on tenure track into the church or not. You know, it's like, they just, oh, hi, welcome, have a hymnal, you know, want to be part of a Bible study class? I'm like, these people just accept me. They don't know about me. They don't know that I was the most foul-mouthed, God-bashing guy at the university. They don't know that. I did find out they actually did know that, but it wasn't of interest to them. They didn't care. They were just happy to have me there. So they accepted me not for what I could do for them or who I was or the fact that I had degrees from the University of California, Berkeley. That didn't mean anything to them. All it meant was I was there and I was on that path, on that spiritual quest that they were on. And they assimilated me into the church, which is a very important part of any community, is to assimilate new people into it. And they loved me. And I graduated in time from things like helping paint the nursery into being a Sunday school teacher. And eventually I was admitted into a lay ministry program. And eventually from the lay ministry program in 1988, sitting in the living room, I turned to my wife and I said, you know, I still want to go to seminary. I know you want to go to seminary. I know you want to go to seminary. Why did I had to work my way through college, and my wife worked, and I got 3 degrees, BFA, MA, MFA. And that was a 7-year process of waiting on tables for both of us out in California. And I was tenured after 3 years and made a full professor in about 8 years. And well, you know, I was a department chair and all that stuff. So, you know, my career at the university was doing really well. When you become a chair, then you start making some real money, right? Well, anyways, I was making the serious bucks at NKU, and she's going, why in the world would you want to give this up so you can be a pastor of a church? And I said, because I need to give all of my time and attention in the service of God. And she said, well, if you keep your job, you can go to seminary at night and see how you like it. So that's what I did for a couple of years. And in my last year at seminary, all the other students had placements as student pastors. The 3rd year of seminary, your final year, you're supposed to be serving a church in a sort of quasi part-time, full-time basis as a student pastor, sort of understudying so that you can eventually become a pastor. And I didn't have a church. I didn't have a clue. And I go off to Washington, D.C. To do mission work, rehabbing, which meant basically demo work in the worst neighborhood in Washington, D.C. And so with this group of people that I'm with, I said, will you pray that God would find a church for me? Because I don't want to be the only person in seminary that doesn't have a placement. And so they all started praying. 2 days later, my denominational guy in Cincinnati calls me up in the evening in Washington, D.C. and says, there's a church in Cincinnati that needs this pulpit supply for a couple weeks. You interested? I said, you bet I'm interested, sure. I'll pulpit supply. That means you preach on Sunday, period. $50 a week. And it's not the money, but it's just not much of a job. You just go in, you preach a sermon, and you leave. And I said, I'll do it. So when I got back to Cincinnati, my interview was the next day. And I drove into a declining neighborhood in Cincinnati. And as I pulled into the parking lot, I said to God, I don't want this church. Why are you making me come here? And the people were looking out the window of their student supply pastor driving up, and they said to each other, this committee of 6 people, there's our new pastor. After they interviewed me, they took me into the sanctuary, and I went up into the pulpit, and I put my hands on the pulpit and went, okay. I mean, this was between me and God. They didn't hear this. And I said, okay, God, I'll do it. If this is what you want from me, this is where I'll be. And that's where I've been ever since. They began to conspire to make me their pastor from the day that they saw me. And they didn't even particularly like me or anything. It was just God had laid it on their hearts that this was the guy. They were taking a big chance on me because here's this art professor, in his 40s who has never served the church, and they're ready to hire me. And I'm taking this declining church in a declining neighborhood. There were about 70 people coming to church there and no children. So my first Sunday, one of the things that I love to do is a children's lessons in the early part of the service. So I call for the children, will the children please come forward? And like one kid comes up. So I do a nice little children's lesson with one kid, and the next Sunday I got 2 kids, and then a few weeks later I got 3 kids, and then I have 4 kids. Now I average 20, 30, 35 kids a Sunday. The church has doubled in size. I'm going to start a program now to double the size of the church again, but the important thing, the church is never going to be spectacular. It's a little Protestant church in a bad part of Cincinnati, Ohio. The important thing is that in this community called a church, and what it is, community with unity, coming together in unity, and the unity is to love God. The first thing we do is to love God, right? And then to serve the world as Christ served the world. So that's our purpose statement, is to love God and share Christ's love with all people. That's the purpose statement of our church that we develop. And that's what we try and do. And sometimes we fight, and sometimes we get along. Like, thank you. I want to do it my way. God has given us this special ability to make choice. What you have been given, there's a word for it, and it's called freedom of choice. And you know what that freedom of choice allows you to do when you go to heaven? It allows you to participate in the creation with God. Because God has freedom of choice, and God has given each of us, not only in the divine image and likeness, meaning that we have creative capabilities, we have rational capabilities, we have compassionate capabilities, we have the capacity to say yes and no, I will and I won't. But we're here because God doesn't want our submission. He wants our love. God wants me to say, I'm going to do it not because I'm afraid of the consequences, or you won't like me if I do it. God wants me to say yes because I love God so much that I'll just do anything to please God. And as I grow in my love for God, I realize that the greatest way that I can please God is to be like God was when he was with us, to be like Christ. And so everything that is came from Spirit. And this material world is a fabrication of God in heaven out of Spirit. We have been put into this material world so that we can better participate with God in the spiritual running and harmonizing of the spiritual and material multiple creations, not just this universe, but all of the other dimensions. So the lesson here is to love. That's the will of God. And how you are supposed to love is the simplest thing in the world, and this is what they told me, and this is what I am learning every day how to do, and that is to love the person that you're with, whoever they are. If it's a parking lot attendant, if it's your mother-in-law, if it's your daughter who's off doing her own thing and treats you with contempt, if it's the people that you work with, your job is to love them. Just them. And love them with everything you've got. And that means to love them means to respond to them in appropriate, loving ways. And what are those ways? The ways that Jesus would have loved them. And Jesus had a lot of ways to love people. And if you read the scriptures, some people, he said, change your ways. Some of his love was real tough, harsh love, and some of his love was very gentle and healing. When you read about Jesus' life, you begin to learn that there's a whole variety of ways to love. But Jesus loved the people he was with, and he showed his disciples how to do that love. They showed other people, and the people that they showed, who they showed, are trying to show me in my church. So we are in a direct link with Jesus and the apostles, being part of that Christian tradition, and we are guided by the Spirit of Christ that is within each of us and is somehow enhanced and magnified when we gather together into community. Can I tell you one more story? I really want to tell you this story, and I'm out of time now. A few years ago, I went on a 8-day silent retreat at a Jesuit place. Now, when you go to a Jesuit place, you're really serious about making a change in your life, right? Because Jesuits are hardcore people. I love St. Ignatius Loyola. If you ever read a book, read his spiritual direction book, because it will give you such insight on how to discern the Spirit of Christ as opposed to the Spirit of Satan. Anyways, I'm at this retreat, and I've spent 7 days in silence, praying all the time, reading the Bible, reading inspirational literature, being really good. No contact with my wife or anybody, no phone calls. And I felt like I've gotten nothing out of this retreat. I just feel like it's been a complete waste. I mean, it's like, God, how about just a little tinkle on the phone? Just give me some goosebumps in my spine, and I'll go home happy. I have gotten nothing. I mean, this retreat is a dry washout, and I'm sure all of you know what a spiritual dryness is. It's just where you feel like, God, I thought we were friends, And my spiritual director, this is the day before I leave, says to me, I like you, but you never let me get close. You never, whenever I try and get close to you, you back off. I said, of course I back off. I'm a professional. That's what professional people do. Professional people keep a professional distance, and I'm keeping my distance from you because I can't handle all your problems. And she said, that's exactly what I mean. That. And I said, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. Goodbye.
Please continue this tape.
Therefore. And I need my professional distance from these people, or they will consume me with their problems. So I'm working myself up into a nice little self-righteous anger, and I can't go to sleep. And now it's dark and it gets late. So I go into the chapel, and the only light in the chapel is that eternal light in the red jar that they hang up, up by the altar. And that's the only light in this whole room. And because it's a hip Jesuit place, there's chairs up front and there's mats in the back that you can take the mats out of the mat stack and sit on the floor. So I'm sitting on the floor in this completely dark chapel with like a half a candle light going in this whole room. And I'm going, God, there's too much suffering in the world. I can't take all this suffering in the world. I don't, I'm just going to be a pastor of a church, not take on all the pain of the world, and that would be crazy for me to take it on. And that woman was crazy to suggest it, stuff like that. And all of a sudden, the Stations of the Cross, which are done in colored ceramic tiles on one wall. You know what I mean by the Stations of the Cross, where they go through, I believe it's 16 stages of the Passion of Christ on his journey to Calvary. They light up in Technicolor. And these things, these little things way off from me to that wall, they were that far away, all of a sudden become brilliant and vivid. And what do I see? I see Jesus being kicked. I see him being punched. I see him being scourged. I see him being tripped. I see him being crushed under the weight of carrying the crossbar. I see him being mocked and ridiculed and the crown of thorns and then nailed on the cross and lifted up. And I'm seeing all these things. And all of a sudden I realize that somebody's taken on all the pain of the world. That he knows more about pain than I do. And I start crying. And as I'm crying, I feel someone standing in front of me. And I look up. And there's Jesus, just the way he looks in the pictures. The regular, the kind of Jesus that you would imagine he would look like, kind of Jesus. And he's standing in front of me. And I'm crying, kneeling on this mat. And I said, I can't take the pain of the world. And he said, I know. I already have. He said, whatever you can't handle, give to me, and I'll carry it for you. Eventually, I looked away and he was gone. That's my key. That's my secret that I've just shared with you, and I don't tell that story very often because that story is so sacred to me that it's not something that I would entrust to many people, but there's a lot of healthcare people, a lot of helping professionals here. And what I'm suggesting to you is that God, Christ, wants you to take on other people's pain, wants you to help other people, wants you to love them. But he also knows how weak and frail we are, and he's saying, you take it, you give it to me. So, when my father was dying last December, I went down to the Trappist Monastery at Gethsemane, Kentucky, which is several hours from where I live, and I went up on a mountaintop in a snow-covered field in December to a statue of Jesus, and I said, Jesus, my dad's dying. There's nothing I can do. It's breaking my heart. It's breaking my mother's heart. And I don't know what to do. And as I lay before the statue of Jesus all crumpled up, he said to me, give me your dad. And so this is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. I said, okay, my dad is yours now. He's no longer mine. I give him over to you. And with that, all of my pain and sorrow and suffering just went away. And my father died a few days later. And I felt really good about it. And I was able to be there for my mother's grief and my sister's grief. And I helped my mother out because I was like, my dad was with Jesus. My dad was with God. He's okay. He's fine. I gave over what I couldn't bear, what I couldn't handle. And that's the key. That's the secret. My wife says to me, I don't know how you do it. You have so many sick and suffering in your church. And I go, I don't do it. Jesus does it. That's the whole secret, and that's what I'm asking you all to consider doing. Give it to him. He wants all your pain. He wants your sorrow. He wants your grief. He wants your hurt. He wants your guilt. He wants all the ugliness that you've done in your life. He wants it all, and he will take it and carry it for you so that you can be the Christ-like child of God that God created you to be. Thanks very much.